Lost media has always been incredibly interesting to me. Just the idea of a piece of media being obscured and lost for so long, just to be found and dug up later, has always seemed pretty cool to me. Lost media has a tendency to just turn up when you least expect it. Sometimes people can go and search for a piece of content forever and ever, and it may not even necessarily exist. Other times, lost media can just pop up out of nowhere, with nobody suspecting it. 2025 has not been the exception. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, The Suicide Sheik, 1929. So this bizarre Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoon from the 1920s starts out with Oswald proposing to his girlfriend before being rejected, leading him down a very dark path of suicidal and nihilistic thoughts, culminating in him attempting to end his life in various ways, through things such as using a noose, having a large safe ball on him, and even rigging a contraption involving a cannon. Overall, it has a pretty dark and eerie tone. Most of that is probably just due to the fact that this is an actual real 1920s cartoon and the obvious subject matter at hand. But honestly, the short does wrap up with a somewhat happy ending. At some point, Oswald's girlfriend's house catches on fire, leading to Oswald trying to redeem himself by saving her, and them getting back together at the end. This Oswald the Lucky Rabbit short was lost for a very long time, but it turns out it was actually stored in a Wisconsin State Preservation Facility before finding its way online. It also entered the public domain in 2025, which means that it's basically free to use for anybody, and that nobody really owns the rights to it anymore. Jumper the Frog. This one's one of the more recent ones that I have on the list. Supposedly, the show was made back in 1988 by a company named Centerpoint Distribution from San Jose, California. The distribution of the show was somewhat unconventional, as instead of being aired on TV, instead it was sold straight to families on VHS. There was even an ad in Billboard magazine back in 1988 that also advertised things like Jumper merch, such as t-shirts and toys. For the longest time, nobody could find footage of it. It was basically completely lost media until April 2025, when a YouTuber named El Supersonic Q uploaded the full, and I mean full, Jumper the Frog pilot, and also documented his search effort, which was a trip in and of itself. I will leave a link to his videos in the description below for anybody who wants to check them out. The pilot itself is pretty interesting, but not that remarkable, as there's not that much to talk about. Unless you yourself are nostalgic about this specific topic, it's basically exactly what you would expect. A low-budget Sesame Street knockoff, basically. But it's definitely worth checking out, just for curiosity's sake. Star vs. the Forces of Evil, the lost Nickelodeon pilot. We all know that Star vs. the Forces of Evil aired on Disney XD back in 2015. But like a lot of other shows, most notably Adventure Time, which ended up on Cartoon Network, it was pitched to Nickelodeon first. Yeah, Nick just seems to have bad luck when it comes to picking up good shows. But then in 2023, we ended up getting a test animation posted to 4chan that ended up looking very similar to the final show we ended up getting, with very few changes. Later though, in 2025, we had a much earlier pilot that was leaked by a user called None of Your Business. The pilot was way closer to Darren Nefzi's original vision. Star was younger. The art style was a bit rougher, and the tone was just a little weirder, but in a fun way. It was apparently made somewhere around 2009, so way before Disney's involvement in the series, and before it was picked up by any real studio. One other thing that I feel needs to be mentioned is that Star is voiced by Gray Griffith in this version, and not Eden Shear, who voiced her in the final series. I don't know, I just really felt like I needed to mention that because it felt kind of strange to have anybody else's voice come out of her other than Eden Shear's. But for an even more insane pilot, one that I think is probably the biggest find of the year so far, and definitely the biggest one on my list, unaired Family Guy pilot. This show doesn't need an introduction. It's already been on for like, what, almost 27, 28 years? So, prior to the pilot episode, Death Has a Shadow, in January 31st, 1999, there was a pilot that was created and pitched to Fox by Seth MacFarlane that had a budget of only around $50,000, which meant that Seth basically had to animate most of this on his own. Strangely enough, the episode was already on the internet for a while and had been uploaded, but nobody really knew about it, as it was only discovered in 2025. I find that to be kind of strange because you now have to wonder how much lost media is just on the internet waiting for us to find it. Not hidden, but in plain view. But for what it's worth, it is pretty cool that this was found. Obviously, there's a couple of changes here from what we ended up getting in the actual series, and whether or not you like that is kind of up to you. Personally, I think that this pilot has a bit of charm to it, but I definitely understand why they made the changes they did. It's actually pretty insane that we're still finding Atari 2600 games in the year 2025, but we are. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a game system that released in 1977. As for the newfound game, it's called Fish. Yes, simply Fish. The game was found on January 10, 2025, by a user calling himself Dutchman2000 on the Atari forum. In the game, you basically just play as a fish who eats other fish and dodges obstacles. Basically, exactly what you would expect from such a rudimentary game. Honestly, there's not much to say, but it is kind of cool that this was found. 2025 might be the year of pilots, as another one was also found, this time from the Comedy Central show, Drawn Together. If you don't know what Drawn Together is, it's basically a more mature adult animated series that parodies multiple cartoon genres whilst also parodying reality TV. I mean, I always loved the show as a kid. Probably shouldn't have been watching it, but I loved it. So there's that. Anyways, as for the pilot, it was basically made as a pitch to Comedy Central, but also more of just a rough outline if you really think about it. The animation is really strangely done, and some of the designs are very off from what you end up getting. For example, the princess character this time around seems to resemble just a regular type of woman, which is kind of weird. I don't know what she's parodying here, especially since this character was basically a parody of a Disney princess in the actual series. For a very long time, we didn't think that we were going to find this pilot, but that was up until one of the creators of the pilot just straight up posted it to his YouTube channel in March of 2025, basically meaning that there was no search necessary, as it was basically just presented to us. Big Brother game footage. Now, you might think that this has something to do with the TV show Big Brother, but surprisingly no. This game is actually based off of the George Orwell novel 1984, which if you know anything about that gets referenced basically all the time. In the game, you play as a character named Eric Blair, which is actually the true name of George Orwell. George Orwell simply just being the pen name he used. The game was a first-person shooter and was being worked on by a game company called Media X, but was cancelled. From what I can tell, the game was mainly about you shooting things and just solving puzzles, navigating obstacles, all while fighting off NPCs and trying to save your girlfriend whilst trying to also dodge the thought police. So basically just a game adaptation of George Orwell's 1984. Now, what is kind of crazy is that every single level of the game was said to be around 5 hours, with 12 levels in total, which seems like a pretty long and even kind of extreme game, to be honest. The game was showcased in E3 of 1998 with a release date of around that year and a price of $29.99. The game did win awards before it even came out, and then canceled for no reason. Eventually, MediaX did lose the rights to it. But it is kind of confusing because why didn't this game come out? I know that might be kind of a weird question, but the game was said to be mostly completed. It was also said to be incredibly advanced for its time, specifically when it involves level design, 3D environments, and facial animations. So why wouldn't a game like this be released to begin with? I guess it's just one of those mysteries we have to deal with. For the longest time, we didn't really have anything about this game, outside of the E3 footage, a couple of screenshots, a little bit of art from the game, and that was about it. But that was up until the game was basically just dumped on the Internet Archives, dated to 1999, by a user named Shed Troll. Finley the Fire Engine pilot. Yep, another pilot. One that was lost and now found, this time for Finley the Fire Engine, a British animated children's show that aired on the BBC. The show revolved around the adventures of a talking fire engine called Finley. The first episode aired on September 30th of 2007 and consisted of 2 segments, as most of the episodes do. However, there was an unreleased episode that was dated all the way back to February of 2004, which never aired, called Fast Freddy Fire Truck, Halo 2 E3 Beta. The only remnants of this original game, or this original version of Halo, comes from the 2003 E3 event. Other than that, we really didn't have much to go off. It was shown only a year prior from the release of the actual game we all know. But this game is not the original game. It differs in many ways, as the game is presented completely differently, along with having things like lost levels, unused designs, unused concepts, and just overall different things in general, to differentiate it from the actual game we ended up getting. From what we can glean, it's very obviously an unfinished game, And you can tell, despite this footage being made only a year before the actual game came out, that this is a completely different game. But this specific mission remained unplayable for years, even after the game was scrapped. We were only ever left with the E3 footage. Other than that, we really had nothing to go off of. That was until the modding team Dixite and 343 Studios decided to revamp the level as part of the Master Chief Collection, meaning that it's now fully playable. VeggieTales Live on Stage is basically just a live play version of the VeggieTales TV show, a Christian show revolving around vegetables that teach life lessons. If you've seen it, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I don't know. As for the stage show, it premiered somewhere around 2002 and toured all sorts of places, specifically Minneapolis. The play featured characters from the show, like Bob the Tomato and Larry the Cucumber, all performing in a Broadway style, as they brought to life stories such as Dave and the Giant Pickle, a retelling of David and Goliath. One thing that stands out to me is just how much Bob looks like Bob. Like, there's so much worse they could have done for a stage play from 2002, but this surprisingly isn't really cursed at all. The show also featured things such as exclusive songs that were made specifically for the play. For the longest time, this whole thing was thought of as being lost, as really nothing existed from it other than a couple scattered images on the internet. However, on February 28th of 2025, the entire play was just dumped onto YouTube by the ultimate unofficial VeggieTales channel, which means that the entire thing's just available now. Now, here's a really controversial one that honestly it's kind of messy to even talk about. The Andrew Show. If you know what it is, then you know what it is. But for all of you that don't, buckle in. It was basically an amateur show featuring a 10-year-old boy in Arkansas whose main job was to promote, well, the Klan. Yeah, I'm not messing with you. This is not like a skit or anything. This is like actually just like a real show that was lost for a very long time. The show was around from 2009 to about 2011. It focused mainly around things like politics and his white supremacist belief system. The show also happened to be written by Andrew's parents, who, from what we understand, were members of the Klan. Yeah, that one's kind of messy. We had access to a couple of the episodes, but in 2025, all of them have now been archived. All the episodes were uploaded by a wiki user called Decorexel. Yeah, I can't really pronounce it. I'm bad with things. Either way, basically, it's all found now. Do with that what you will. The Puzzle Place. The Puzzle Place was a PBS show that aired around the years 1995 to around 1998. The show revolved around a couple of diverse puppet characters who hung out in this place known as the Puzzle Place. Basically just doing things. It's a kid's show. What do you think it's gonna be like? You see in one of these, you're kind of seeing all of them. Despite the fact that the show was pretty well liked, most of the show became lost media simply due to the fact that it faded from the spotlight and wasn't really preserved very well. This meant by the time we ended up getting to the mid-2000s, most of the show was lost media and only survived through a couple of fan recordings. The show, for a very long time, was considered partially lost. That was until a group of preservationists basically were able to compile all of the episodes, meaning that the entire series is now found. Most of the VHS recordings already existed, they were just hard to find. And I think that this whole thing kind of just goes to show what media preservationists can really do when they start working together on a common goal, because sometimes it really is just that easy. Overall, I think that's where I'm going to end the video. If you guys like this one, then hey, I might make a part 2 to this video, or even a part 3, I don't know. There's a lot more lost media that I just wasn't able to cover in this video. And for better or for worse, I'm willing to sink my teeth even deeper into this whole rabbit hole. Anyways, peace out.